So the Bucks have had a pretty interesting offseason so far. Depending on who you ask, they've either made some really bad moves, and the moves they made haven't made them too much better, and they probably gave up a lot to get the players that they got. But if you ask some other people, they're going to say that these moves have made the Bucks the best team in the East, and they should be the team that should get out of the East next year and get to the finals and potentially win a championship. But to be honest, we can't really judge yet. I think that the quality of these moves, it's all going to be predicated on whether Giannis stays next year or not. If come next offseason, Giannis ends up signing that supermax with Milwaukee, or even if he signs, like, say, a 1+1 or just a 2-year contract, I'm not sure, like a shorter term contract with the Bucks, I think that we're going to look back on these moves and we're going to say that they were good moves for the Bucks, right? It's all going to be predicated on whether he signs or not. Because, yeah, if he doesn't, then, yeah, Milwaukee's in a pretty bad spot because Drew Holiday, that was their big acquisition this offseason, unless they make some other big move. But it looks like the team they have right now, the roster they have right now, is what they're going to be running starting next season. Drew Holiday, he was their big acquisition, but they did give up quite a lot to get him. I mean, Eric Bledsoe wasn't too big of a loss because you're basically just replacing Drew Holiday with him. They lost George Hill. He was a really nice backup point guard for them, and he was a perfect player to really complement Giannis' style of play. He was 45+% from three last year. I don't know if he had the highest percentage in the league from three last year, but he was definitely up there. So he really spaced the floor for them. They ended up signing DJ Augustine, so I think he's a little bit worse than what George Hill was last year for them, but he's still going to be able to replace him. If he can just be 80% of what George Hill was for them last year, then I think they should be fine there. But the main thing was just the draft picks, right? And like I said, it's going to depend on whether Giannis signs with them next offseason or not. But if he leaves, then those 3 first-round draft picks are going to be huge losses for the Bucks, because when you lose a player of Giannis's caliber, you're definitely gonna drop a few tiers in the standings. I mean, I think the Bucks, they could still be good enough to make the playoffs, but then you're kind of in no man's land where you're not good enough to compete for a championship, but then you also don't have draft picks. So I think that's just the main fear that a lot of people have, and I mean, rightfully so. But if Giannis does re-sign with them, then I mean, those picks are going to be kind of obsolete. It's not really going to matter because they're going to be contending anyways, right? So we'll have to see. But I do like the Drew Holiday fit. Overall, he's just better at everything Eric Bledsoe does. I think defensively they're both really good, but Drew Holiday is a bit bigger at 6'4", which is going to make him, I think, a bit more versatile on defense for the Bucks. He's going to be a more versatile defensive weapon for them because Bledsoe's a bit smaller. He's only 6'1", I think. So Drew Holiday's size is going to be something that the Bucks can definitely use on defense. And then offensively, he's a bit more of a reliable shooter. I think he's a bit better of a playmaker, and the big thing is that Drew tends to show up in the playoffs, right? Like, we saw how well he played in that Portland series. It was a few years ago when the Pelicans were matched up with Portland, and they ended up sweeping them, and Drew Holiday played incredible defense on Dame and CJ, and he was just a great two-way player. I think that the Bucks looked at Eric Bledsoe's performances in the playoffs these past 2 seasons, and he was pretty disappointing, right? So that's what's going to matter at the end of the day, right? The Bucks, they're going to get a lot of regular season wins. They're going to be a great regular season team, but what matters is the playoffs, right? And Drew Holiday definitely makes them better in the playoffs. So that's going to be the biggest difference between this Bucks team this year compared to the past 2 years, is that play that they're getting in the playoffs from the point guard position. And then they had that botched trade with Bogdanovic. It looks like he's going to be going to the Hawks, but because the trade didn't go through, they're going to keep DiVincenzo. I think he's still a really good young player. He really showed a lot last year when he got a lot of minutes. He can really space the floor. He can attack off the dribble, make plays. He just makes a lot of smart plays, right? And that's really impressive for a young player, because a lot of young guys, they might get drafted to teams that have championship aspirations, and their just knowledge of the game it's not entirely there yet. They still have a lot to learn, but DiVincenzo, he just plays within himself. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and I really like him. I think he's definitely an upgrade over Wes Matthews, just because he can do more than Wes Matthews could. Wes Matthews was more of just like a spot-up three-point shooter, and he could play some defense, but offensively, he couldn't really put the ball on the floor. That's something that DiVincenzo is going to give the Bucks this year, so he's going to just make their offense more versatile. So I like him starting at the 2 next year. Then you're probably going to have Middleton in that starting lineup too. At the 3, we know what he can do. I would like to see Giannis start at the 5 next year, though. That's something that I think the Bucks really have to consider, because the last 2 years in the playoffs when they lost because Giannis had the ball in his hands too much, trying to really be the initiator of the offense. And we saw teams really put up a wall against them, and that made him struggle. And on top of that, guys just weren't hitting their shots. I think the Bucks need to use Giannis as their 5, because on defense, if he can be the guy like inside guarding the center, and he can grab more rebounds, he's going to be able to push and transition, and that way the Bucks can get a lot of easy transition buckets. We've seen teams like the Thunder do that with Westbrook a few years ago, when he was getting triple doubles and averaging triple doubles, and we've seen the Sixers do that with Ben Simmons at times. It just really compensates for guys' weaknesses when they don't have the ability to really shoot. So I think that Giannis, if you play him at the 5, and then maybe you could have Bobby Portis start at the 4. I think he was a big pickup for them. Maybe you could have him start at the 4. He still has the ability to shoot the 3. He shot at about like 36% from 3 last year. So he can definitely hit them. He's definitely respectable. So I would like to see them experiment with that, but I just feel like Budenholzer, he's going to probably go with Lopez at the 5. Lopez, don't get me wrong, he's definitely a valuable player. I think he was on one of the all-defensive teams last year, and he can still stretch the floor. But it's just the fact that if you have Giannis and Lopez playing with one another, Lopez is going to have to guard 5s, because he can't guard quicker 4s on the perimeter. I don't know, because then you don't get that advantage of Giannis getting more rebounds and being able to push, right? Because then Lopez is going to be grabbing boards, and he's going to be getting it to Giannis, and then it just limits their transition opportunities, right? So if you just started Giannis at the 5, I really think that it could make their offense better, because they're going to get easier, quicker buckets, right? A starting lineup of Drew, DiVincenzo, Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, and Giannis. That team is really, really, really good defensively. They have a lot of switching potential. Giannis is a great rim protector too, so he would be fine. Like, I know Brook Lopez was a good rim protector for them last year, starting at the 5, but Giannis would be great as well. And then, like I said, they got the ability to push and transition a lot more, because DiVincenzo, he can grab boards and he can handle the ball and push too, right? Wes Matthews didn't really have that ability. Bobby Portis could probably do it occasionally, but the important thing is that Giannis would be grabbing a lot of boards, and he'd be able to push, get a lot of easy buckets, right? So I think the Bucks really need to try out lineups like that next year. The only teams that I wouldn't really be sure about is against maybe the Lakers, just because you got Anthony Davis there. But I mean, really, when you're playing a guy like Anthony Davis, a guy like that who's that big playing at the 4, you just got to kind of play him as tough as you can and hope he misses. I think against all the other teams in the league, that lineup would be really, really good. And then off the bench, you could have Brook Lopez. I think Robin Lopez might be a free agent. I'm not sure if he's still under contract with them. But anyways, you could have Brook Lopez as the backup 5. You could play him about 20 minutes a game. You could still feature him in lineups with Giannis. But yeah, I would like to see him coming off the bench, getting a little bit less minutes, giving more minutes to Giannis at the 5. And then you got DJ Augustine. He's like a George Hill replacement in my eyes. And then you got Bryn Forbes too. Solid 3-and-D guy for them. We'll have to see what other pickups they make, if they make any. They also have Pat Connaughton too, for what that's worth. At the end of the day, I think the Bucks are really building for the playoffs when your rotation gets cut. So we'll have to see, but I do like the moves that they made. And if they feature that starting lineup that I was talking about, I think that the Bucks, they'd probably finish first in the East during the regular season, and they would be my pick to get out of the East and get to the finals. As far as if they can win or not, I mean, it's going to depend on who they're matching up against, who they match up best against coming out of the West, but they're going to have a good chance. I like what the Bucks are doing. Hopefully their guys can step up in the playoffs. Chris Middleton, he still has to prove himself a bit in the playoffs too. Hopefully Giannis can improve on his jump shot a little bit, continue to improve there so that he can keep the defense honest. But this team, they definitely got a lot of potential. So I'm going to be excited to see them play. Hopefully Budenholzer can make the right adjustments and he doesn't just rely on his stars, but we'll see, man. I mean, hopefully they can get Giannis to resign, because if not, they won't be in a good position. But they could definitely do some things next year and make some noise.